Good morning, SmartHER News. It is Sunday morning. I know it's a day we don't normally get to talk, but the news is big enough, and it's time that we just take a moment to reflect about what we're seeing in the headlines and hopefully bring them to you in a little bit of a different way. Just so for a little perspective, I'm here in California Pacific Standard Time. I'm watching the news develop in Afghanistan, so that's about a 12 hours ahead or so of where I am right now. Wherever you are in the United States, I'm sure you're seeing the headlines as well as what's the development in Afghanistan as we're seeing the Taliban surge across the country and now really encircling Kabul. However, we have to be careful. We're getting a lot of reports coming at one time. And so it's important that we do operate with some prudence. But it's very clear. The situation today is dramatically different than last week on Sunday when we first started it, to see the Taliban start to move. So what I'm going to try to do here, and we'll see if it works out. And if we don't, we may have to hop back out, hop back on. Let me see. Is I'm going to see if I can get it with Hollie. Hollie is a journalist that is in Afghanistan. She's been there for a few days now, and we were able to speak to her on Friday. It was late on Friday in the day when we first spoke. And hold on one second. What I'm going to do, guys, just give me one second. Let me see. We're trying to do something that's a little bit difficult, but if you hang with me, let's see. I mean, it's no easy feat to try to figure out, can we actually get to someone live in Afghanistan right now? Hang with me. And there we are. Technology is
Hi.
amazing. This is Hollie. Hi, Hollie.
Hi.
So I just gave everyone just a little bit of an overview. And I just said, listen, what's really important, we got to take a step back. We have to operate with some prudence about what's happening on the ground in Afghanistan, but that we may have a really unique opportunity to talk to someone
Oh, hang
there.
on, hang on. You're going on my laptop as well. I'm terrible with technology. One second, one second. It's not saying this off. I'm sorry. What is going
It's
on
okay.
right
We'll be
now?
patient. I think we'll be patient, won't we?
I was trying to figure out how to get you on the laptop, which is why I was late.
That's
Okay.
okay. You know what? I think you have a lot of things that you're paying attention to, Holly. So you're forgiven. You're
Thank you.
forgiven. So obviously, last Sunday was really the first reports we saw that the Taliban had started to take strategic cities. We talked on Friday, and at that time, you mentioned how quickly things were moving, but that it was the sense of it was that maybe there was a little bit more time. Can you just catch us up? What's happened? Now we're speaking on Sunday, so about 48 hours later, not even. What's happened in the last 48
I
hours?
honestly, Jenna, I can't wrap my head around this. I am just baffled. I'm baffled. That's all I have to say. So, literally with Mazar as an example, when we first got in, my photographer Jake and I, it was very early Thursday morning, and it was a normal city. It was full of life. People were in the streets. The markets were full. Everybody was at the shrine. Like, it was full of life. And I just remember being shocked because everybody was talking about all the northern provinces going. And I just thought, okay, this must be completely exaggerated right now because there doesn't seem to be any imminent threat here. And then Thursday was great. I remember we went out, there were ice cream makers in the street. It was just amazing. I thought, what an amazing city. Friday, things had shifted. And you could just feel it. There was a sense of fear. There was people were a lot more like, they're coming, they're coming. And I remember thinking to myself, are you sort of exaggerating? Is this going to happen? The shopkeepers were sort of closing down, but things were still, they were open and there were people around. It wasn't. And then Saturday, it was just a ghost town, and people were lining up at the banks to get money out. And we were hearing a lot of rumors about there was sort of three front lines, and the first one had been breached. And I thought, oh, they'll defend the city. They're not going to get through the next two. And yeah, and then it was gone, just like that, literally just like that. And
What did that look like, Holly, when you say it was gone?
that just meant that, from my understanding, Jenna, and this is where I think, and we can go into really great detail about this another time, but from my understanding of talking to people, the level of corruption within the Afghanistan military and the government, that's how the Taliban won a lot of this, is they will pay the commanders off to surrender a city before. So those who genuinely do want to fight, and there are a lot of men and Dostum's people, a lot of people that wanted to genuinely fight, they were basically kept in the dark, and A&A commanders had paid off the Taliban in advance to surrender the city, and they were just left with, you have no choice but to basically run. So that's what's happening, and the level of corruption that has enabled the Taliban to come back to power is, it's just mind-blowing, to see that, and to see all the weapons that have now gone to the Taliban's hands when the Afghan army runs away, that we paid for. It's just
There's a lot to think about.
And that's one thing that I've always tried to express my frustration with Iraq, with Afghanistan, is I often saw terrorism as being a secondary problem to the corruption, and Afghanistan is a classic example of that. I think you have the elements, many strong elements that are very pro-Taliban within the government and military factions that will sell off information that hurts the cause. And then also with that, if you have to pay a corrupt official every time you go through a checkpoint, and you're just trying to feed your family, or you have to pay a bribe for something, eventually you're going to get annoyed enough that you are going to want to join some form of insurgency to fight against that. And so I often think of terrorism as a secondary problem as opposed to the main problem. And I think that's where a lot of our policy, in my opinion, has gone wrong.
Well, it's an important point that you really underscore, which is that when you think about groups like the Taliban, and you mentioned this in our interview, they're controlling everything, social services. So, think about if you wanted to go, you need to see healthcare, your electric bill, that at certain points they're controlling the very basics of your life. So you're forced to have to interact, and then you have to make choices about what that interaction looks like. There's a lot of folks that are asking about where you are, Hollie, and how you're doing. Can you tell us, how do you feel about sharing that? I mean, I know it's obviously a very developing situation.
Yeah, it is, and I'm fine, and I'm in a safe place, and I'm fine. But I guess when we talked about on our interview last time, what does it mean when a city falls? Well, I wasn't sort of quite expecting that I would experience that the following day myself. So I'm currently in an area that is controlled by the Taliban, but it is, but I'm safe, and everything is fine, and I will be, hopefully as soon as possible getting to Kabul. But yeah, I'm safe, and things are quite orderly. So initially when the Taliban came in, they came in on bikes, so you could sort of really sense a difference. There was a lot of celebration.
When you say bikes, Hollie, what are motorcycles?
They're in old motorbikes, so they're all okay. 4 of them on an old motorbike, and they sort of came in. And mind you, Jenna, they came in without any resistance. So there you go. There was no fight to this. There was very little gunfire that we heard. And they basically, they just sort of came in, and it was a big sort of celebration throughout the night last night, where we could hear them and hear a lot of, just a lot of rolling around the streets. And I think some of them had gotten hold of a few police cars, and were enjoying the sirens. And then,
do you have reports of violence in the streets, or
nothing that I've seen, nothing that I've observed. I've only seen one woman out of the house, and that she was fully covered. But yeah, one woman. So there are very few women or children on the street. The men are obviously around, and it's a very different vibe. It's just a very different vibe.
Hollie, are you, one of the things that we've covered over the last couple of weeks is that there was some uncertainty about the future of U.S. airstrikes. So just a little background for our viewers right now. The United States, although we've been drawing down, has supported the Afghan army through airstrikes, because airstrikes, air power is something that can set us apart, right? That the Taliban don't have the fighter jets. And so, or any of that sort of presence. And so there was, and I remember we actually used a quote on Smart News. There was like this big, like very vague statement about, well, what will airstrikes look like after August? Um,
Right. Sorry.
are you
Some
hearing?
tears coming. Some tears coming. Some Afghan
Oh,
green tears are moving around.
okay. Well, that's good. It's good. Please have the tea. Um, do you hear anything? Like, are you hearing of any airstrikes around the country? Are there any airstrikes
Yeah,
near
and
you?
this was one thing that I brought up on Saturday when there was when the Mazar was obviously being taken, that there was no air power. There was nothing. I heard nothing. I didn't hear a single helicopter. I didn't hear a single plane. It was quiet. It was absolutely quiet, and that was also my frustration. Is we haven't left yet. The official down date is August 31st, and the U.S. had intended to support the Afghan army Air Force, sorry, up until then, and I heard nothing, zero. And I know a lot of people were requesting air power prior to that from President Ghani, who has since fled after saying he would never flee. So yeah, there was just nothing, and I don't know whether they were just not capable of that, or yeah, I honestly have no idea. But
Yes, and you
that
you
was
actually pointed
one
that out.
thing.
You pointed
Yeah.
that out. I want people to know you pointed that out in your reporting, and I think that's really important. You said you were asking those questions, which is like, why? Like, what is this about, and what does that relationship look like going forward? I mean, these are obviously really big questions. Right now, we're kind of in a, I don't want to say an emergency situation, but it is a quickly developing story. So let's go,
Hugely.
Holly. As a journalist, you're like who, what, where, when, how. So we know that you're okay for right now. We know that there's the city that has fallen to the Taliban. Um, where do we go from this, Holly? What are you watching as you're seeing? Because you're seeing the headlines that everybody else is seeing. You're
Mm.
just seeing them from the vantage point of the country that is being covered. So just kind of, why don't you just kind of walk us through what are you really watching for? Like, what has your most attention?
I think I want to be clear in that the Taliban wants to be seen as a legitimate governing force, and it has in the past been it did rule Afghanistan 1998, I think, till 2001. Not all of it, mind you, but most of the country. I think Panjshir Valley is the only province that's never been ruled by the Taliban, and that is because it's a Tajik stronghold. And for those people who don't understand, Afghanistan is very much driven by ethnic lines. So you sort of have the majorities, which are either Pashtuns, which is what the Taliban is, and also what the current government generally is, President Ghani, former President Ghani. And then the Tajiks, which are also another stronghold, which is Dr. Abdullah, who's supposed to be the power sharer with Ghani, although that really wasn't the case. But so if you compare it to somewhere like Iraq, which is driven a lot by sort of Shia versus Sunni, Afghanistan is different in the sense that it's often a sort of a Pashtun, Tajik, and then you have a whole lot of minorities within that, but they're the two major ones. So Panjshir, as I was saying, is a very big Tajik stronghold, so they would never allow the Taliban to kind of come in. And that's actually going to be really one to watch, because one of my very close friends and former fixers is from the Panjshir Valley, and I was talking to him, and he was saying, Panjshiris will never surrender to the Taliban, but what will happen is that they're going to end up having to create some sort of deal with them, because the province will be surrounded by the other strongholds that the Taliban has, and they'll cut off the supply route. So they won't be able to get food, and they won't be able to get all the things. So they'll have no choice but to cut a deal with the Taliban government. So
Can you go back, Holly, to why this has happened so fast? I think that for some people that are new to the story might just be like, what, like, how did this
yeah.
happen? Why is there no resistance? And what happened to the people that we trained? And what happened to our vehicles on the ground there that maybe, I mean, like, why did this happen so fast? How could this have happened in a week's time?
And where a lot of us are asking that same question, and I'm questioning. I was sitting here today with, I have a great photographer with me, Jake Simkin, and he spent a lot of time. He lived in Afghanistan for 6 years, and I just said, was I being, in not having predicted this, was I being, where did even I go wrong on this? I just could never have imagined that it would happen so fast. And when I was getting my visa to come on this trip, I was sitting with a friend of mine who was a consul general in the US, and And he said, look, Kabul will at least be safe through to 2022. My goodness, the US hasn't even left and it's gone. So it was a failure in a lot of people's parts. I think maybe even the US too. I just think the information process or the information that was being collected about it has been incorrect. And I think perhaps a huge failure was just the level of the numbers, the sheer numbers that the Taliban has. And that, I think, we underestimated that. I mean, even, where I am, it's just there's hundreds and thousands of them. And you can sort of tell that they're not from here. And they've
You're
taken
saying
over
hundreds of thousands of Taliban.
Taliban. Oh, not hundreds of thousands, but hundreds to thousands. It's hard for
Hundred,
me
oh,
to know.
hundreds of,
But
yes,
it's just
but so
you can
many.
tell they're
Yes.
not from here. They're not locals here. But the sheer number of them to have captured these cities the way that they have in such a short period of time, all across the country, to have come in from wherever they've come in from, and to be able to mobilize like that. They're not great fighters, and that's the thing. They don't have. They're just not super skilled. A lot of them are just kids, to be honest with you, but they have this incredible advantage in how many of them that there are. And whenever there's an attack, they're clearly able to replenish, and they clearly just have a swell of people wanting to join them at any given time. And I think it was a real numbers game with this, and that's how they were able to get the power, in addition to the bribery and paying people off, in addition to having already a lot of, having infiltrated the ANA specifically. So there was a huge tactic to it. But yeah, it's just mind blowing. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I just can't believe that it happened like this. And yeah, the US hasn't even gone.
Well, and as you point out, you don't need a lot of skill to be dangerous. You can still be dangerous, and numbers matter. They definitely matter on the ground. How are you doing, Holly? How are you doing through all of this? This must be a complete shock to
Yeah,
you. You have a lot of people worried about you, including myself and all of our audience here at Smarter News and beyond. So,
oh,
how are
thank
you?
you. I'm doing fine in this minute. It's a little minute by minute with me. So for the most part, I'm a fairly calm person, so it's good. But it's certainly a unique time and a unique situation. And my pain is that I will get to leave the country at some point and get to go home to the United States and live my life. And I'm very aware that the Afghan people don't get to do that, and the women don't get to do that. And I can't imagine, especially in somewhere like Kabul, which is quite modernized now, and you have this entire generation of women that have grown up, 20 years old now, that have been able to go to school and become doctors and become lawyers and live their lives and work and be independent. They will never leave the house again. And if they do, they will be completely covered. They will have to have a male escort. They will not go to school. I think you go to school up until about adolescence, and then you're never allowed to leave again. And their lives they will never, I don't know, and I don't see that particular situation changing anytime soon. The US obviously is not going to go into Afghanistan anytime, and I just think that's the end. And I hate saying that, but yeah, I feel, I mean, it sucks for the men too. They will lose a lot of freedoms that they used to, and you're not allowed to play music and things like that. But for the women, they've got the most to lose, and it really I can't imagine what they must be feeling.
While we're sitting here, the voices of my kids are kind of around us right now, and I, can't imagine too, as a mom, thinking about this, right, and thinking about your children and what's to come and what's the future. A lot of the news cycle is going to not move in that direction of what things look like in the next several years. It's going to move minute by minute over the next several hours. And I just want to prepare our audience that we're going to see a lot of different things and a lot of different reports, and we have to, we're going to work through it carefully. Holly, let's just end with this. We always ask this question because I promise to keep this short with Holly, by the way, because she's got a lot going on. And I hope that we can just kind of be in touch over the next, several hours, several days, and keep on updating. One of the things with Smarter News that I want to do differently than other news networks is really explain why this matters. Always. It doesn't matter how little the story is or big the story is. you just explained why this really matters to the people as you kind of see the broad picture. Can you explain why this matters? Why the loss of Afghanistan to the Taliban matters at this point?
I just think, especially, as an Australian and an American, and I think one thing that makes both those countries really great is the value that we have of every human life. And a part of that is valuing, the lives of people and Afghanistan in particular. It's helped so many Americans, over the past 20 years in, we can go down that rabbit hole of the war, but we won't. But I think Afghanistan, it's been such a big part of the American fabric, and there's been a lot of well-intentioned people who have meant the best for that country. And to think that this is the Taliban that was taken very quickly out of power almost 20 years ago after 9/11, and we'll be looking at that 20th anniversary with them back in power. I can't get my mind around it, and that should matter to every American. And we need to take a serious look at what happened and why this particular situation transpired, because we should all feel somewhat angry about that.
It's a really important point. No matter, sometimes when you're watching a story, you don't get to choose who you share the story with. So as Americans right now, we're sharing our story of our country with the Taliban. It's something that we don't get to choose, but sometimes you get to choose who you share a story with. And Hollie, we're able to choose you, and we're so grateful. I mean, you have changed our perspective completely. And I don't know what we would have done over the last even several days without it, because it's so valuable. And so we had a little longer time for the interview. I promised I would keep it short.
I love talking.
But I really appreciate it. And I hope that we can definitely keep on doing these updates. So our priority is that you stay safe. And I remember what your grandmother said, right? You told us during our last interview, you are not alone. That's the thing. Like, no matter, you're not alone. So stay safe. Thank you, Hollie. And we'll have more on SmartHER news, throughout the next several days. But any other final things, Hollie, before we go? I'm seeing some questions, but I think you kind of put a final.
I'm happy to answer a few questions if you have them.
Sure. Let me just see. I'll try to kind of, I don't know if some of them I'm going to avoid because they're asking exactly for the details about what's your next steps, Hollie. And I know those are somewhat uncertain. So let me just see if I can
so it's
pull
a work
them.
in progress. It's
a work in progress. That's a good one. Monica was just asking about asylum processes for people in Afghanistan. Have you had any insight on that as to like what, we're talking about the evacuation of those individuals, but the asylum process is not necessarily an easy one. Do you have any insight on that, Hollie?
Yeah, that's a really difficult one. I think that obviously the State Department has sent a lot more people to kind of process it quickly, although nobody was expecting Kabul to go today. I still can't believe I'm saying that. So I don't know. I think there are a lot of people that are trying, and I've spoken to a lot of people who have gone to Kabul to try to put it together, and sadly enough, I don't know that their cases are going to be strong enough. So we're going to see. Yeah.
Wendy's just asking about the freedom of movement. Are people free to move around the country right now?
Well, most airports are shuttered. So, even where I was yesterday, immediately, 5 minutes after the takeover, we got a notification that my flight had been cancelled. So, and I believe Kabul airport, not 100% confirmed, but I believe Kabul airport is also closed now too for the unforeseeable future. Commercial airlines have stopped. But what happens is, and this is what point I do want to stress, is that so someone like Herat that was taken, they do end up, the airlines will negotiate with the Taliban, whoever's in control. It does take a few days, and then the airlines resume. So they're trying to, as I said, be the governing body. So it's not sort of a forever, and they're different to. The Taliban is different to a group like ISIS or Al Qaeda, which are designated terrorist groups, and the Taliban is not, because the US chooses to negotiate with them, and just different agendas. But they do want to be perceived as being able to run things effectively. So commercial airlines will eventually resume in most of the places they've taken. It will just take a little bit of time to work out those details.
Catherine had a great question. It's probably one we need to explore in a little more depth, but it's a really important one, which is who is supporting the Taliban? If it's not, where is that money coming from? We just covered the Taliban leadership meeting with the Chinese foreign minister just the other day. So, are there elements at all of other foreign intervention, evidence of that from other big
I think,
powers?
yeah. Well, I think you certainly, when you ask pretty much any person in Afghanistan, they will be quick to tell you that most people are coming from Pakistan. So that is definitely, which Pakistan obviously denies very heavily. And whenever I've brought this issue up with Pakistan officials, they've always said, we're the ones who built a big gate, we built a big fence, and we're not. Afghanistan is trying to pass the blame to us. But having said that, I've also interviewed several Taliban fighters that have been jailed, been part of quite big attacks, and pretty much all of them have said to me that they were trained in camps in Quetta, which is in Pakistan. So that gives you some indication. The fact that everybody has pulled their embassy personnel out, except Russia, gives you some indication of who has good relations with the Taliban. And Russia has been quite open about that for a long time. They've often said that they will support the Taliban because the Taliban was fighting ISIS and they saw ISIS as being sort of a threat on their doorstep. So that was Russia's reasoning for that. And then, of course, as you said, China has been meeting with them and it plans to keep its diplomatic personnel there. So it's just a really interesting times. There's also a big opium trade, and that's where they get a lot of money from that too, as well as from foreign places. And they're awash with cash. That's they have a good chunk of money. So that's enabled them to have made these incredible battlefield successes.
Jay was asking about borders. Obviously, Afghanistan has a lot of different borders with different countries. Are borders open or to the other countries? Are borders shut?
Well, they yes and no. So I'll give you one. So Uzbekistan, everybody from the north, when it fell, fled to Uzbekistan, and I believe Uzbekistan, in the last 24 hours alone has had about 10,000 people come to its borders. So it's been overwhelmed and has actually closed it. But I assume at some point things will be reopened. So yeah, it's just a matter of Pakistan, for one. It has an incredibly long and very porous border. So it's definitely that whole border isn't monitored. But the Taliban a couple of weeks ago took one of the major crossings. It did close for a couple of days, and then the Pakistan government was able to negotiate with the Taliban, of course, and have that reopen, that supply route. So they are still able to sort of come in and out, and that's just a matter of them having the relationships with the countries that it borders.
All right. Holly, I think we're going to leave it there. I really appreciate this time. I know our audience does as well. And we're seeing again more the where we're standing right now, or where we're sitting right now. What time is it there for you, Holly? Just give what time of day?
It is, oh my goodness, it's getting late. It is 9:50. No, it's not. It's 7:50.
7:50. So we're
Yeah.
almost 12 hours different. So it's going
Yeah.
into to nightfall for you. Is
Yeah.
that correct? Yes. So going into another night. The
Yeah.
news as it stands, just so because people may see a lot of different things, is the Afghan president apparently has left the country. We're seeing all
Hmm.
sorts of reports about that. Why does
Yeah.
that matter, Holly? Because that's a really important thing. And why is that important to watch?
Here's the thing that annoys me, Jenna, and this is something I've also experienced in dealing and kind of why I'm in my current predicament. But he promised he would never leave, and yet he and his closest aides kind of got out and escaped the city, apparently, according to reports, and then basically after that let it fall. So it's often a situation where a lot of these leaders who beat their chests and say how strong they are, and yet because they're privy to information that the rest of us aren't, they will quickly get out and basically leave their people, abandon
Hmm.
their people. They'll be safe in another place. They have the money, and the passports and whatever it is they need to get out, but the people who they're supposed to be governing are the ones that are left there to deal with this new reality. So that's pretty, in my opinion, very cowardly,
And
and
that's
shouldn't
where
stay.
we don't know. It's like a captain never abandons the ship, right? Even if the ship is sinking. And so, symbolically and strategically, very important news. We don't have at this point where he's gone. We don't have confirmation of him sighted elsewhere. So we'll see, but plenty of news outlets from the Associated Press and New York Times are
Yeah.
reporting it. So, there we are. All right, Holly, we appreciate it. Want you to stay safe. We look forward to talking to you again. And we really just, are so grateful. That's all I can say right now. I'm so grateful for this connection and for you helping us through this story, because I really don't think there's anyone better in the world to do it right now. And I mean
Thank
that.
you. I
So,
appreciate it. Anytime.
so we'll be in touch. Thank
Take
you,
care.
Holly. Okay,
Bye.
talk to you later. So we'll see here. That's Holly speaking to us in Afghanistan. And, how remarkable to be able to have that opportunity. Really great questions you asked, really important ones. Who's supporting the Taliban? What's happening next with the U.S. role? What is the strategy? What happens to the people of Afghanistan if and when the capital falls? And I say if and when because it's looking like that's the case. I always want to be very careful not use inflammatory language. I think there's enough of that in the news, right? Enough headlines. That's why we use direct quotes. But we also have to be very specific about what's happening right now. And we're really watching, very important chapter in history. So continue to follow this. We'll be in touch with Holly. We'll send updates. What an amazing person to be able to connect with. And it is, I'm always sort of heartened by what journalism allows us to do. You and we're sharing our stories right now. That's a gift. And I consider it that. So thank you. Thank you to Holly and her team. And we'll keep you posted. If you have questions, let's go ahead and work through them. This is important. This is decades of the United States in Afghanistan and more investment in more ways than one, thinking about the lives lost and the people's lives forever changed on all sides because of this. So leave your questions. Let's work through them, and more to come on SmartHER News. Bye, guys.